Before we start, before anything else, if you haven't already, go give this a watch. It's probably one of the best F1 documentaries you've ever seen. And quite timely given what today is. Ce ne sempre. I would have a quip right now, but there is no joke. This documentary is amazing. But what isn't amazing is Red Bull parting company with Adrian Newey and making two very glaring gaffes in the process. First of all, the day itself, May the 1st. This is not the right time to announce something like this, 30 years after the passing of Ayrton Senna, in a car designed by Adrian Newey. And even though he was cleared of charges regarding the Williams car and the event itself, it's still not the best of days to announce something as big as this. And yes, you could probably call me out for the same thing, but I'm not afraid to call out Red Bull for something like this, because this could have waited at least 24 hours, or ideally it could have waited until next week. I think this is kind of disrespectful. And also, by the way, whoever's in charge of the Red Bull Twitter, admin, it was 2008 when Toro Rosso got the pole and victory. Yeah, do better. So even though this is a huge bit of news, Adrian Newey stepping down from being the Red Bull technical director after nearly 20 years, I am hugely disappointed with the team in how they've conducted themselves, in the midst of all the other stuff they've been dealing with over the last couple of months. And also, they were going against the wishes of Adrian Newey. Newey is a very private person. He barely attends Grand Prix anymore. He is going to be attending the Miami Grand Prix. Adrian Newey has said that he did not want to draw attention to himself, as he said to Sky Sports. But no, Red Bull have clearly gone against his wishes and have decided to take back control of the narrative that has been forming over the last few days, which supposedly has been in the Newey camp, mostly run by his legal team, trying to find ways of getting out of the Red Bull contract and really starting off the rumours that he was even considering leaving. Even though the talk of him leaving has been going on for many months at this point, ever since the Christian Horner allegations broke up. And I sincerely believe Adrian Newey feels terrible for what happened, because after what happened, he seriously considered getting out of Formula One entirely, stepping down in 1994. That might have been it for him. To me, this feels like a kick in the teeth from Red Bull, that despite their glowing and simpering rhetoric in their official statement, and also saying our achievements rather than his or the achievements of the team, they're still probably quite sore about Adrian Newey leaving, because throughout the entire rumour process over the last week or so, they've been consistently denying and saying, we're not aware of these talks about Newey leaving. They probably did know, but they were keen to try and sweep it under the carpet. But now, that's no longer the case. The rumours have simply become far too big to ignore, or, Newey had actually gotten to a place where, they could officially say that their time is up. I don't think they really paid attention to what the day was. All of the media was expecting this to happen at least tomorrow, on Thursday, which is Media Day. That's when all the press conferences happen. Even the Italian media, the ones who are really fueling the fire of the speculation about Adrian Newey's future, were expecting all of this to have gone down on Thursday. And there have been many other rumblings from the Italian media, and I know they can easily be a double-edged sword, but usually when it comes to Ferrari and Gazzetta dello Sport, it usually tends to have some weight to it. Including the really big news that has just broken out in the last couple of hours, is that on the way to Miami, Fred Vasseur had halted his flight to America to instead fly over to London to talk to Adrian Newey about a supposed deal. It's quite compelling too, since the news means that we could expect something perhaps next week with a bumper deal, which could also explain the acquisition of a title sponsor in the form of HP to pay not only for Lewis Hamilton's arrival, but also the potential arrival of Adrian Newey. Currently, Adrian Newey is paid about $10 million a year to work for Red Bull, and he's been paid that essentially since he started properly in 2007. Might he be paid more than that? I imagine so, given the fact that he's essentially blessed Red Bull with all of their titles. I wouldn't be surprised if John Elkann and Fred just go, "Hey, Adrian, how you doing? 10 million? Oh, that's chump change. How about a cool 50 mil? Okay, that's a little bit excessive, but I would not be surprised if it's at least over 25 mil. And what makes this all the more likely is that Adrian is not going to be leaving at the end of 2025, as was expected, but instead before the 2025 season even starts. What is supposedly going to be happening, at least according to Formula Uno, is that right now, Adrian Newey will cease his operations with the Formula One team immediately, and then scale back his role within the Red Bull Technology Group to instead focus on the RB17 hypercar, a project that he and the Technology Group have been working on for quite some time. McLaren. That's expected to be finishing up at the end of the year, which means that Adrian Newey will have basically some time to himself, twiddling his thumbs, probably, as he was in 1997 for McLaren when he was on garden leave after Williams, looking at what the regulations are saying and perhaps penciling himself with his own technical drawings a 2026 Ferrari car. Then he could maybe throw the notes to Maranello when he actually arrives, and then they might be able to work from there. That's what he did when he moved to McLaren, and it's probably what he did when he moved from McLaren to Red Bull. I think it's safe to say that Ferrari are going to be the ones that will get Adrian Newey, because all the signs are pointing towards the Italian team's direction. They have the capital, they have the desire, they have been gathering so many important members. Fred Vasseur has seriously made his mark as a really good team principal. No one's questioning his authority anymore, and his ability, and what he's been able to do with the SF24 already. Who knows what they'd be able to do with future cars? He's done really well. He's got the backing of the Ferrari chairman, he's got Lewis Hamilton, who he's worked with for a long time, and now he could bag Adrian Newey as well. The dream team is starting to form, and his work on the SF26, or whatever it's going to be called, could be very, very big, since work on that car had been halted several months ago, and it can only start again after New Year's Day 2025. So with that little bit of time where it's been on pause, Newey can have some time to think, and then maybe get to work immediately and be a huge part in that design, not just for 2027, that'll probably be a fully developed Newey car. But I think the 2026 iteration will still have a huge swathe of Newey's notes in it. And I think another main purpose of his arrival is to really stop the trend of Ferrari not doing that well when it comes to brand new regulation changes. 2009, that car was absolutely terrible. It did improve over time. You could easily tell that Ferrari didn't quite get the regulations right, but thankfully, because there was no cost cap, they were able to spend their way out of that problem and catch up to Brawn, but not quite as much as Red Bull or McLaren. 2014, the Hoover. That car was so bad that it pushed Fernando Alonso out of that team after having tried his best over the last few years to get a world title for them, and then they did improve with Sebastian Vettel coming in. They eventually got the hang of it, but that first year, And 2022, well, that wasn't so bad. They were still competitive. Yes, they were. They had a fast car, but it was an incredibly fragile one. It had its fair share of reliability problems, which Charles Leclerc saw in quite sharp relief, especially in Paul Ricard. With Newey being potentially the next major player arriving in the Scuderia, their dream team is now forming and could be complete, a genuine sign that Ferrari mean business. This could be the brand new Ross Brawn, Jean Todt, Michael Schumacher and Rory Byrne. Even though actually Rory Byrne is still around at the Scuderia, albeit in an advisory capacity. Now, while some people were quick to dismiss all this and saying, oh, Adrian Newey's probably going to go off into retirement since he's been designing a yacht and he's shown desires in designing racing yachts as well. But at the same time, all the stuff that we've heard from Newey and all of the rumours and from his legal team shows there is a keen sign to continue in Formula One. The desire to design Formula One cars has simply not gone away. He'd be curious in trying to design a new era of F1 cars again, which will be less reliant on the ground effect design for all-out performance, and now start to rely again on the power unit for overall results. So I can't see him walking away right now, considering that, he still has the bug, he still has the desire. He's 65 right now, he could easily retire. In fact, there were talks that in between McLaren and Red Bull, he could have retired there and then, and even between his time at Williams and McLaren, he could have retired there and then. Talks of Newey and retiring have been going on for decades, so I really don't see that changing anytime soon. Newey's going to continue until he can no longer hold a pencil. Maybe he might walk away in a few years' time once he's shown that he's been able to do the same again at Ferrari and bring them success, because that will be the last team that he hasn't worked for that has a major role in Formula One. And Ferrari has the biggest role in Formula One that there is going. Wait, how can you be so sure that no other big teams might snap him up instead of Ferrari? Why are you pinning your hat on the Italian team? Why not Aston Martin? Why not another major team? Well, there have been talks, especially from Andrew Benson over at BBC Sport, that Newey's legal team and Newey himself aren't all that interested with a possible role at Papa Stroll's team. It's not quite certain as to why, but I can imagine that maybe money isn't the biggest motivator. It's a personal desire. As I mentioned just now, Newey has a bug and curiosity in designing Formula One cars. He hasn't the desire to be rich because his Red Bull salary, I believe, has remained the same since he arrived, $10 million a year. That's good compensation. He could have easily asked for more after getting all of those titles, but he hasn't. He's still got the same base. Sure, he might get bonuses, but his base salary is constant. So money is not the big reason why he would go. And I can easily see Aston Martin just throwing bucket loads of money at him to be the main reason why he would go there. Sure, the Valkyrie project might be a nice thing to reunite with, but I don't think Newey would want to go to Aston Martin just for that. I think Ferrari is still a bigger player. And also, there have been other teams that have ruled themselves out in the pursuit of getting Adrian Newey. Worth mentioning that he's taking a hands-off approach to the whole thing and watching this play out from the perspective of a fan. Probably because, as rumours might be saying, they're already putting in a lot of cash and trying to acquire Max Verstappen, that apparently being a $160 million a year contract. So yeah, I don't think they could push the boat out for Verstappen and Newey. Yes, I know, Toto Wolff has denied the whole thing about Verstappen, but Red Bull denied the whole stuff about Newey up until now, so, things can change. And McLaren's Zak Brown's ruled out his own involvement by saying that whilst he's good friends with Adrian, McLaren's already got a good plan when it comes to their overall designer package and their roles, with another Red Bull engineer and designer, Rob Marshall, leading the charge. Now that's another important thing to note. Rob Marshall, a senior player at Red Bull, went to McLaren. That's the beginning of a major brain drain at Red Bull. Sure, not many people had heard about Rob Marshall, so therefore it passed without great incident. But he was there from the very beginning, and that was probably just as big an important role as Newey was to the aero side of things. Rob Marshall was a key component in the engineering side of things. And I know that you're about to say, well, Adrian Newey wasn't really working on the day-to-day stuff anyway. Pierre Vacher was. Well, that is absolutely true. And Pierre Vacher's team has done a very good job in instilling the Red Bull's continued domination and success. I don't expect Red Bull to suddenly become terrible, at least not very quickly. Or would we? Even though Red Bull's keen to say that Adrian's not part of the day-to-day operations anyway, and he's focusing more on their hypercar, Vacher a while back called Newey irreplaceable, commending Newey's ability to look at things from a sideways perspective, as well as challenging their thinking and his senior design team. And that's quite important as well. Sure, Newey might be working on other things and he's not designing the car solely by himself, but his mere presence is important in ensuring that Red Bull stay in the right direction that Newey established. Steady evolution. Yeah, you might have talented individuals and they might come up with a really good design, but without Adrian Newey's experience and oversight to come in and go, didn't you think of this already? Or, oh, that doesn't look quite right. Maybe you might want to try something else like that. Offer his own input, then that could easily prevent a catastrophic event where an upgrade path suddenly goes all skew whiff, like it did with Aston Martin last year. Up until Canada, Aston Martin looked like the second or third fastest team. I mean, at least with Fernando Alonso driving. But after Canada, things started to go wrong, and their overall performance started to wane. And it wasn't until Qatar where their performance picked up again, and they were able to hold on to having a decent battle with McLaren for fourth place. Mistakes can happen, and Adrian's oversight might have been enough to prevent Pierre Vacher's team going in a really questionable direction. And another reason why I don't think Red Bull will fall off in 2025 is simply because of the ethos that Adrian Newey instilled. Steady, continuous evolution. Don't just change the car willy-nilly just because. The RB18 of 2022 is essentially the same as what the RB21 will be in 2025, albeit with slight improvements and better understanding of the ground effect rules. It's a steady, continuous evolution because the rules haven't changed, and that's what Newey has said for many years. And a really good example of this are the Leighton House cars of the late 80s. Those cars remained essentially the same up until essentially the MP413 of 1998. The FW cars were essentially evolutions of the Leighton House cars. Those Leighton House cars are why Williams signed Newey up in the first place. Up until 1998, the rules didn't really change all that much after the banning of turbos, and the only major changes that came about were the safety changes in 1994 and the narrowing of the cars on the groove tyres of 1998. In the eyes of Adrian Newey, slow and steady wins the race. You slowly evolve a car, you better understand it, and you can further optimize it. And that's why he's been really sort of downplaying Newey Red Bull's continued domination in this development cycle, because the returns are slowly diminishing. Other teams are catching up or finding something completely new. So by next year, Red Bull might be pretty close towards where everyone else is. And yes, Newey even mentioned that the Japanese upgrades were kind of important. They might have still been okay without them, but it was better to have them than not to have them in a way. And I think Ferrari will probably follow the same work ethic as Red Bull have done, and I think their timing has been spot on. If they were going to make use of Adrian's oversight and experience to the full, the deal needed to be done roundabout now to go into 2026 with a compelling package right from the start. One that Newey could design and capitalise on Hamilton's rearward driving style on, and also live out a dream for both men to work for each other. You see, they could have done at McLaren, but Adrian Newey was parting company with McLaren when Lewis Hamilton was slowly asserting himself ready for 2007 in a development role for 2006. They just missed each other. Both men have mentioned over the years that it would be a dream to work with the other, with Hamilton saying that it would be a personal dream for him to work with Adrian Newey back a couple of years ago. And now, that might be the case. Maybe Lewis might have been the inspiration for Fred and John Elkann to go after Adrian. And right now, whatever Lewis wants, Lewis will get. And also, they're making the most on Newey's personal endeavours, as he mentions right here. Ahem. I feel now is an opportune moment to hand that baton over to others and to seek new challenges for myself. I am confident that the engineering team are well prepared for the work going into the final evolution of the car under the 4-year period of this regulation set. On a personal note, I would also like to thank the shareholders, late Dietrich Mateschitz, Mark Mateschitz, and Schaller Judvitya, sorry if I get the pronunciation all wrong, and Christian, who has not only been my business partner, but also a friend of our respective families. Also, thanks to Oliver Mintzler for his stewardship, and Eddie Jordan, my close friend and manager. Wow, Eddie Jordan is manager? That's the biggest thing I took from that statement. Whoa, Eddie, you get around, don't you? Why not? Give it a go. There's not much to lose. But wait, I hear you say, could this end up in disaster? Ferrari spending their way into glory with these new title sponsors, securing Lewis and John Elkann having a really whimsical way of money handling? Well, true, it's what happened with Toyota, but the difference here is that Ferrari do know what they're doing with the sport since they've been around since the beginning, whereas Toyota didn't. They were stubborn. They believed that their existing Toyota way and not securing well-established big talents within the sport would be enough for them to get wins and get podiums all the time. Yeah, okay, they did get podiums, but they did not really get the glory that they were hoping for, and that's why they're no longer in the sport. Now, the biggest question remains, will Red Bull eventually implode? Well, right now, in terms of social media reputation, yes, they are currently imploding, and now, given the timing of this news, they've imploded even harder. But in terms of overall results, I don't see Red Bull falling apart next year. Max Verstappen will probably continue to win titles. Unless he does go to Mercedes, in which that case, no, and Checo will then probably win the 2025 World Championship. Maybe. Like I mentioned, Vacher and his team are not suddenly going to go, oh, I don't know how to design a car. No, that's not going to happen. No, let's be real here. That RB21 is still going to be incredibly good, the odds-on favourite to be a title contender. But without Newey's hand there, we could slowly see things changing. It'll be very, very subtle. It'll be very, very gradual. A tweak here, an upgrade path there, you know, things might diverge and it might not have been what Adrian Newey would have done, and therefore they might find themselves in a tricky situation that Aston Martin did last year, and then they might not get the regulations right. The power unit that Red Bull and Ford are developing might not be all that good. The aerodynamics might need to be relied on more. And if they're not as good and the active aero turns out to be a disappointment and something that Max Verstappen can't handle, then that might be an issue as well. As we've seen with Lewis Hamilton and many other drivers over the years, they have their preferred regulation cycles. Lewis, over the beginnings of the turbo hybrid era, was fantastic. That was his preferred type of car. The ground effect cars of now, not so much. The next set of regulation changes might yield a car that Max does not like. That drop in performance potentially, and that lack of preference with Max, might be enough to continue the Dream Team drain to happen. Newey's gone, Max might go, more people might go. And also, even though it's not mentioned, many people were talking about Newey not liking the discord about what's going on behind the scenes, the internal politics of it all, which understandably has been the case since the passing of Dietrich Mateschitz, the owner of Red Bull itself, at least in the West. He's been very important in the overall path of Formula One and Red Bull, but now that he's gone, there's been massive power grabs and trying to find out who's going to be in control of Red Bull's Formula One dream. It being Oliver Mintzler, the current CEO of Red Bull GmbH, or Christian Horner. And I think it's really not going to end that well. And this is probably the way that Red Bull will fall apart. Not on the track, but just in the boardroom. And that's not the way things should go. And also, this is something that Newey's probably already seen before, this amount of discord in the boardroom. It's what happened essentially at Williams and McLaren. Him butting heads with Patrick Head and Ron Dennis about what his role with the team would be. And that's why he would decide, okay, I've had enough of this, I'm going somewhere else. That's now happened at Red Bull. It was bound to happen, it just took much longer. And this could mean that up and down the grid, teams will be starting to poach Red Bull employees, offering bigger salaries, bigger job roles, and perhaps a change of scene away from the drama. Much like what is happening with Andretti right now. Them signing many personnel from existing teams, as well as getting a potential team principal in Otmar Safnauer if the team gets a place in F1. To find out why I think Andretti's plan has legs and going to Silverstone was a really good idea, go and watch this video next because it's getting very, very juicy indeed. I think this will happen. Ooh.